This lesson is the first one about the three scopes of emissions. You remember that the GHG protocol divides all the emissions in these three scopes. Scope 1, direct emissions from the operations of the factory or the organization. Scope 2, indirect emissions from purchased electricity, steam or heating. And Scope 3, indirect emissions from the entire value chain, up and downstreams. So that are suppliers, customers, transportation and also the product's end of life. Let's now in this lesson dive into Scope 1. The other two scopes come in other lessons. Hello, I'm Norbert Vaassen, GHG accountant and energy engineer. When a company burns fuel, runs machinery or operates vehicles, those emissions come straight from their operations. The same is true for any organization, including local or national government. These are called Scope 1 emissions. But why do they matter? Because they are the easiest emissions for a company or other organization to control and reduce. In this video, we'll break down Scope 1, show real examples, and explain how organizations can track and lower these emissions. What are Scope 1 emissions? Scope 1 emissions come from sources that are owned and controlled by an organization. The GHG protocol defines them as direct emissions from four main categories. One is the stationary combustion, fuel burned in company-owned boilers, furnaces and generators. Then you have two, that's mobile combustion. Those are the company-owned vehicles, trucks or ships that burn gasoline or diesel. Then you have three, the process emissions, and here we have chemical reactions that release greenhouse gases, like cement or steel manufacturing. And four are the fugitive emissions, and these are leaks from refrigeration systems, air conditioning or gas pipelines. And here it is clear we are not talking only about industry, because this last example in particular is also for the users which have HVAC or are responsible for gas transport. Okay, some examples. You can think of a factory running on natural gas, a truck fleet that transports goods, or a chemical plant that produces CO2 as a byproduct. All these emissions fall under Scope 1. How to measure Scope 1 emissions? To measure Scope 1 emissions, companies need to track fuel consumption and apply an emission factor to calculate the carbon footprint. So you have here the formula: emissions is equal to the fuel consumption times the emission factor. So if a company burns 10,000 liters of diesel and the emission factor for diesel is 2.68 kilograms CO2 per liter of this fuel, then you have this calculation. You have 10,000 times this factor, and then we are at 26, nearly 27 tons of CO2. Companies use reporting tools like the GHG protocol inventory spreadsheet of greenhouse gases. They use the ISO 14064 standards or government databases for these emission factors. We will talk in the following lessons about software and other calculation and reporting tools. How to reduce Scope 1 emissions. Since companies and other organizations directly control these emissions, the reduction strategies include following: energy efficiency, upgrading boilers, using better insulation, and optimizing processes. In energy efficiency, diagnostics is of utmost importance. Just like in medicine, the therapy comes after. Fuel switching is also something that you can do yourself. So transitioning from coal or fuel or another fossil fuel to lower carbon fuels like natural gas, which is also fossil fuel but it's lower carbon, or even hydrogen. But also the combination of renewable energy and electrification can be a solution. Finally, energy storage is a solution to use waste heat at a later time so that you don't need fuel at all or you need less fuel. I know many solutions because I have been energy engineer during 3 decades. Then you have the fleet electrification, so switching company vehicles to electric or hybrid models. Also avoiding transport altogether or rationalize it. That's also a solution that many people even don't think about. And then you have carbon capture, and that means that you capture the CO2 before it can go out into the atmosphere. The best is, of course, that you can use it for some other process. That will create a cash flow and thus pay an incentive to pay the effort of this capture. So summarizing, Scope 1 emissions are direct emissions from fuel combustion, industrial processes and fugitive leaks. They are the easiest to measure and to control. In the next lesson we will talk about Scope 2 emissions. Those are indirect emissions from electricity use. They can be bigger than Scope 1 emissions, for example for local or central government or for example the service sector, where they do all their activity just with consumption from the grid. And they have no manufacturer, they have no processes. Make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss it. Put also a bookmark on this course so that you can always use it and refer to it if you need it.